The stagecoach wheel hit the rut so hard it felt like the world had just cracked open right under her feet. Olivia Edwards was thrown from her seat, her head smacking hard against the wooden frame of the coach. And a split second later, a second, much louder crash echoed from above. Her wedding trunk. It was everything she owned in the entire world. The coach lurched one last violent time, and then, with a groan of tortured wood, it shuddered to a halt. "Timber Creek," the driver grunted, his voice thick with dust and boredom. The end of the line. It was 1875, the Montana Territory, 1,000 brutal miles from the manicured, predictable life she had known in Boston. She was here to marry a man she had never even met, a man named Samuel Turner. And she was arriving at her new life with a throbbing head, a heart that felt like a trapped bird beating against her ribs, and, as she would soon discover, only one shoe. She peered cautiously through the grimy window. Dust. A long, sad street lined with a few tired-looking wooden buildings. A handful of people moved about their business, none of them appearing to be waiting for a mail-order bride. There was no sign of Samuel he'd promised in his last letter. His words, written in a confident, looping script, had been so clear. "I shall be waiting on the platform the very moment your coach arrives, my dear Olivia." But there was no platform, and there was no Samuel. "Are you certain this is Timber Creek?" she asked, her voice a reedy whisper she barely recognized as her own. She clutched the bundle of his letters in her handbag like a talisman. The driver didn't even turn around. He just spat a brown stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Been driving this route for 8 years, madam. This is it." He hopped down and began unceremoniously hauling luggage from the back. This was it. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm the frantic fluttering in her chest, Olivia gathered her heavy skirts and stepped down from the coach. The moment her stockinged foot touched the rough, sun-baked earth, a sharp pain shot up her leg. The missing shoe, likely lost hours ago when they'd forded a rushing river, was now the least of her worries. She turned to ask the driver about a hotel, a place where she could wait, but her words died in her throat. That was when she saw it. Her trunk lay in the middle of the street, split wide open like a melon. Her carefully packed belongings, the simple dresses she'd made herself, the precious few books she'd inherited from her father, her mother's silver locket, were scattered across the filthy ground. A gust of wind, thick with dust and the smell of horses, picked up a piece of her lace and sent it tumbling down the street like a lost ghost. Tears, hot and immediate, sprang to her eyes. She dropped to her knees, a sob catching in her throat, her hands frantically trying to gather her life back together before it could all blow away. "Need some help there, miss?" a deep voice asked from above her. Olivia looked up, shielding her eyes from the harsh afternoon sun. A tall man in worn denim and a dusty brown hat stood over her, his shadow offering a small patch of relief. Unlike the other men she'd seen so far, whose eyes had lingered on her with a kind of hungry curiosity, this man wasn't leering. He wasn't laughing at her misfortune. His eyes, she noticed, were a startling clear blue, and they held a look of genuine concern. I would be most grateful," she managed to reply, trying desperately to maintain some shred of her Boston dignity, even as she knelt in the dirt with her underthings on public display. The stranger crouched beside her without another word. His large, calloused hands moved with a surprising gentleness as he began helping her gather the scattered items. He carefully folded a lace-trimmed nightgown, his movements efficient and respectful, before handing it back to her. "Name's Wade Dixon," he said, his voice low and calm. He looked at her, then at the wreckage of her trunk. "You must be Samuel Turner's bride." A hot blush crept up Olivia's neck. She took the folded garment and quickly tucked it away, her fingers fumbling. "Yes, I'm Olivia Edwards. Have you seen Mr. Turner today? He was supposed to meet the coach." Wade Dixon's expression changed in an instant. The concern vanished, replaced by something much harder, much colder. A shadow passed over his face, and his jaw tightened. He stopped gathering her things and slowly rose to his feet, dusting off his hands on his trousers. "I reckon you haven't heard, then." His tone sent a new wave of ice through her veins. She stood up, too, clutching a handful of her salvaged belongings to her chest. "Heard what?" Wade didn't look at her. He looked down the empty street toward a two-story building with a faded sign that read, "Turner's Hotel." Then his gaze came back to her, and his blue eyes seemed to see right through her thin veneer of composure, right into the terrified heart of her. "Samuel's gone. Gone." The word hung in the air between them, heavy and final. "Gone where?" she asked, her voice cracking. "He knew I was coming. We had an agreement. His letters." Wade took a step closer, and the sheer size of him was suddenly intimidating. He wasn't just a helpful stranger anymore. He was the bearer of terrible news, and there was an intensity in his eyes that frightened her. "He left town about 3 weeks ago," Wade said, his voice flat, devoid of any sympathy. "Rode out with a group headed for the gold fields in the Black Hills." He abandoned her. It was that simple. She had spent every last cent she had, traveled 1,000 miles across a hostile country, all for a man who couldn't even be bothered to wait for her. The humiliation was a physical blow, and she staggered back a step. But that wasn't the worst of it, not by a long shot. Wade leaned in a little closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a conspiratorial and dangerous sound. "But he didn't just leave, Miss Edwards." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle on her. "He fled. Fled." The word was a gunshot in the quiet afternoon. It spoke of debt, of crime, of something far worse than a simple change of plans. Olivia's mind reeled. The man in the letters had been a pillar of the community, a successful businessman looking for an educated wife to share his prosperous life. "Fled from what?" she whispered, the question tasting like ash in her mouth. Wade's gaze flickered back to the hotel. "From his responsibilities, from his debts, from the mess he made of this town." His eyes came back to hers, sharp and assessing. "Did he mention he owned that hotel?" "He said he was a businessman," Olivia replied weakly. "He mentioned investments." "He mentioned nothing about owning a hotel because he doesn't," Wade said, his tone biting. "It belongs to his cousin, Milton. Samuel was just managing it. Or mismanaging it, to be more precise." Suddenly, the driver's casual comment, "Turner's Hotel is just yonder," took on a sinister new meaning. The whole town must have assumed she knew. They must have been watching her, waiting for the moment the truth would crash down on her. Just like her trunk. Wade glanced down at her single, stockinged foot, then back at her face. A flicker of something that might have been pity crossed his features, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "And it appears you've lost a shoe along the way." The observation was so mundane, so absurdly practical in the face of her entire world collapsing, that a hysterical laugh threatened to bubble up from her chest. She choked it down, the effort making her eyes water again. She had no money, no fiancé, no prospects, and now no shoes. She stood abandoned in a strange town where her very name was tied to a man who had run away. She had gambled everything on Samuel Turner, and she had lost. To her surprise, Wade didn't mock her. Instead, a strange look crossed his face as he looked her up and down, from her disheveled hair to her dirt-stained stocking. "Well, Miss Edwards," he said, his voice softening just a fraction, "seems like you've had quite a journey." He gestured toward her. "May I?" Confused, tired, and completely out of options, Olivia simply nodded. Without another word of warning, Wade Dixon bent down and scooped her up into his arms. Her modest traveling dress billowed around them as she let out a startled gasp, her hands instinctively grabbing onto his broad shoulders. The fabric of his shirt was rough beneath her fingers, and he smelled of leather, sweat, and something clean, like pine soap. "Mr. Dixon, what on earth are you doing?" she cried, scandalized. To be carried through a public street by a stranger. In Boston, it would have been social suicide. Wade just laughed, a sound that was surprisingly warm and genuine. "I'll carry you the rest of the way," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. He started walking toward the hotel, his stride long and confident. "Can't have you hobbling through town like a wounded bird. First impressions matter in a place like this." "But my trunk, my things," she protested, her voice weak. "I'll send the hotel porter for them, assuming there is one," he added under his breath. "Right now, let's get you somewhere you can sit down and figure out your next steps." His arms held her securely, and despite the utter impropriety of the situation, Olivia couldn't help but feel a strange sense of safety. The exhaustion and disappointment were so overwhelming that they had burned away her sense of decorum. Besides, there was something reassuring about Wade's straightforward, no-nonsense manner. He saw a problem, and he fixed it. "Are you a friend of Samuel's?" she asked, trying to distract herself from the strange fluttering sensation in her chest every time he glanced down at her. "Not exactly," Wade replied, and his jaw tightened again, the muscle flexing just beneath his tanned skin. "We've had business dealings. I run the livery stable at the edge of town." As they approached the hotel, the few curious onlookers had grown into a small crowd. People stopped what they were doing, stepping out of shops and onto porches to watch the spectacle of the dusty cowboy carrying the half-shoeless woman down the main street. "That's Samuel Turner's mail-order bride," someone whispered, the words loud enough for Olivia to hear clearly. "Poor thing," another voice added with false sympathy. "Doesn't know he's gone and bled the town dry." Heat flooded Olivia's cheeks. The humiliation was a physical thing, a crushing weight that made it hard to breathe. "Please, Mr. Dixon, put me down," she whispered urgently. "Everyone is staring." "Let them stare," Wade replied, his voice a low rumble against her ear. But he did gently set her on her feet, on the top step of the hotel's porch. "Wait here. I'll speak to Milton, Samuel's cousin." Olivia stood awkwardly, one foot still in its stocking, trying to make herself as small as possible as Wade disappeared into the dim interior of the hotel. She could feel the eyes of the town on her, dissecting her, judging her. She was Samuel Turner's folly, a walking, breathing testament to his deceit. Minutes later, which felt like hours, Wade emerged. He was followed by a thin, balding man with wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose. The man's lips were pursed into a thin line of disapproval, and he regarded Olivia as if she were a piece of dirt someone had tracked onto his porch. "Miss Edwards," he said, his voice cold and clipped, "I'm Milton Turner. I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Olivia's voice rose, laced with disbelief. "I have his letters. He invited me to come here, to be his wife. He sent money for my passage." She reached into her reticule, her hands shaking as she pulled out the neatly tied bundle of correspondence. Milton took the letters from her, his thin fingers barely grazing hers. He scanned them quickly, his expression souring even further. "These appear to be genuine," he conceded, handing them back as if they were contaminated. "But I'm afraid Samuel's impulsive nature often leads to complications. He left no instructions regarding your arrival." "But where is he? When will he be back?" Milton gave a short, humorless laugh. "He's not expected back for months, if at all. Gold fever has a way of changing a man's plans, especially when he has creditors in every corner of the territory." The world seemed to spin around Olivia. "What am I to do?" she asked, her voice breaking. "I have nowhere to go. I have barely any money left." "The hotel has no vacancies," Milton said flatly, a cruel satisfaction glinting in his eyes. The mining company has booked all available rooms for their surveyors." He made a show of looking her over, his gaze lingering on her single shoe. "I'm afraid I can't help you. You are Samuel's problem, not mine." He was about to turn and go back inside, to leave her standing there on the street. But Wade, who had been listening silently with his arms crossed over his chest, stepped forward. His movement was sudden and menacing, and Milton actually flinched. "That's not good enough, Milton," Wade said, his voice dangerously quiet. Milton sputtered, adjusting his spectacles. "Now see here, Dixon, this has nothing to do with you. This is a family matter." "It became my business the moment Samuel left town, owing me over $500, Wade shot back, and a gasp went through the small crowd of onlookers. $500 was a fortune. "And it became my business the moment this lady arrived, a victim of his lies." Wade turned to Olivia, his expression softening slightly. "My sister, Wilma, lives just outside town. She runs a boarding house. She's been looking for some help, cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing. It's respectable work, and you'd have a place to stay until you decide what to do next." Olivia looked at him, searching his face for any sign of deception, any hidden motive. But all she saw was a straightforward offer, a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. She found herself nodding slowly, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. I would be most grateful for the introduction, Mr. Dixon." "Good," Wade said, turning a final cold glare on Milton. "I'll arrange for Miss Edwards' trunk to be delivered." He then looked back at Olivia. "But first, let's find you another shoe." Wade didn't just find her a shoe. He took her to the general store and, despite her protests, had the storekeeper fit her with a pair of sturdy, practical leather boots, charging them to his own account. He would not hear of her refusing them. "Consider it a loan," he'd said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You can pay me back when you're able." 30 minutes later, with her feet comfortably shod and her broken trunk tied down in the back of a wagon, Olivia found herself sitting beside Wade Dixon, heading out of Timber Creek. The town she was supposed to call home was already receding behind them. "I cannot thank you enough for your kindness," Olivia said, stealing glances at the cowboy's strong profile as he handled the reins with practiced ease. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, and the air was beginning to cool. Most men would have simply laughed at my predicament. A small smile touched the corner of Wade's mouth. "I did laugh, if you recall." "Yes," she admitted, a faint smile of her own appearing, but not unkindly. She adjusted her bonnet, the ribbon fluttering in the breeze. "You've saved me from complete and utter disaster, Mr. Dixon." "Wade," he corrected her gently. "And I haven't saved you from anything yet. Wilma's boarding house isn't exactly the life you probably imagined when you agreed to marry Samuel Turner." "No," Olivia said quietly, looking at her hands folded in her lap. "But it's better than being stranded with no prospects at all." She hesitated for a moment, then decided to ask the question that had been burning in her mind. What kind of man abandons his bride-to-be for a gold rush? Wade was silent for a long moment, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The only sound was the rhythmic clop of the horse's hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels. "The kind who's always looking for the next easy score," he finally said, his voice grim. "The kind who never appreciates what's right in front of him." He glanced over at her, his blue eyes holding hers for a moment that seemed to stretch on forever. "If you don't mind my saying so, Miss Edwards, Samuel Turner is a fool." The boarding house, which Wade and his sister had named Dixon House, turned out to be a large two-story structure with a wide, welcoming wraparound porch. It was situated on several acres of land, with a small, well-tended orchard visible behind it. It looked peaceful. It looked safe. As they pulled up, a woman in her 30s with Wade's same sandy hair and determined chin emerged from the front door, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted apron. "Wade, I wasn't expecting you today." She stopped short when she saw Olivia sitting beside him, her brow furrowing with curiosity. "And who might this be?" Wade hopped down from the wagon and then turned to help Olivia down, his hands firm and steady at her waist. "Wilma, this is Miss Olivia Edwards. She arrived on today's coach." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She was expecting to marry Samuel Turner, only to find he's run off to the Black Hills." Wilma's expression instantly softened from curiosity to a deep maternal sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, her voice warm and kind. She shot a dark look in the direction of town, as if she could scold Samuel from miles away. That Samuel Turner never did have the sense God gave a jackrabbit. She extended a hand to Olivia, her grip firm and welcoming. "Welcome to Dixon House. Don't you worry about a thing. We've got plenty of room, and as it happens, I'm desperately in need of some help." Inside, over cups of strong hot coffee and slices of freshly baked bread slathered with butter, Wilma explained her situation. Her husband had passed away from pneumonia the previous winter, leaving her with the boarding house and far more work than she could manage on her own. She had 5 boarders at the moment: 2 quiet school teachers, a clerk from the mining company office, and 2 elderly sisters who had moved west to be near their nephew. "It's honest work," Wilma assured her, her eyes kind but direct. "The pay isn't much to start, but you'll have your own room and all your meals, and Timber Creek is growing fast. There might be other opportunities for you once you get settled in." Olivia found herself warming to the straightforward, no-nonsense woman. Wilma was like her brother. She saw a problem, and she looked for a solution. "I'm a fair cook," Olivia offered, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time that day. "And I'm quite good with numbers. In Boston, I helped my father with his accounting business before he passed away." At the word accounting, Wade, who had been quietly sipping his coffee, suddenly perked up. "Accounting? The livery's books are a complete mess. I've been meaning to hire someone to straighten them out." "I would be happy to assist," Olivia offered immediately, looking at Wade, "as a small repayment for your kindness today." And just like that, an arrangement was settled. A new life, one she could never have imagined, was beginning to take shape. Olivia would help Wilma with the cooking and cleaning at the boarding house in the mornings. In the afternoons, she would work on organizing Wade Dixon's business accounts. In return, she would have room, board, and a small stipend, enough to begin saving toward whatever future she decided to pursue. She was no longer a bride-in-waiting. She was a housekeeper, an accountant. She was an employee. That evening, after a long and exhausting day of serving dinner to the boarders and learning the rhythms of her new life, Olivia sat alone on the back porch, watching the fireflies begin to rise from the tall grass beyond the garden. The day's events seemed almost dreamlike in their sheer improbability. Just that morning she had been Olivia Edwards, a future bride anticipating the start of a new, prosperous life with her husband. Now she was essentially a servant in a frontier boarding house, indebted to a stranger who looked at her with an intensity that she found both unsettling and strangely compelling. The kitchen door creaked open behind her, and Wade stepped out onto the porch. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might want this," he said, his voice a low rumble in the quiet evening. He offered one of the cups to her. "First day in a new place is always the hardest." "Thank you." Olivia accepted the cup, her fingers brushing against his. She noticed he'd added just the right amount of cream and sugar. "How did you know how I take my coffee?" Wade settled into the rocking chair beside her, the old wood groaning in protest. "Noticed at lunch when you were with Wilma," he said simply. "I pay attention to details." It's a useful habit to have out here." They sat in a companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the chirping chorus of night insects and the distant, lonely call of a coyote. The vast, starry sky seemed to press down on them, a blanket of infinite possibilities and infinite dangers. "I should be devastated," Olivia finally said, her voice barely a whisper. "By all rights, I should be in my room crying myself to sleep over Samuel's abandonment." Wade took a slow sip of his coffee. "But you're not." It wasn't a question. It was a statement. He had seen it in her already. She considered this, turning the warm cup in her hands. "No," she admitted. "Strangely, I feel almost relieved. Is that a terrible thing to admit?" "Not terrible at all," Wade said, shaking his head. He set his coffee cup down on the porch railing. "It means you've got good instincts. Samuel Turner isn't the marrying kind, at least not the staying married kind." He paused, then dropped the next bombshell as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. "He's been engaged twice before that I know of. Both times the women were from back east. Both times they sent him money. And both times he disappeared right before they were due to arrive." Olivia's cup clattered in its saucer. Twice before, he had done this to two other women. The letters, the promises, the talk of building a life together. It had all been a lie. A practiced, well-rehearsed lie. She wasn't just an abandoned bride. She was the latest victim in a long line of them. "He never mentioned that in his letters," she said, her voice numb with shock. "I expect there's a lot of things he didn't mention," Wade said grimly. He turned in his chair to face her more directly, his expression serious in the pale moonlight. "Why did you agree to marry him, if you don't mind my asking? A woman like you, educated, from a good family in Boston. You must have had other options." The question was forward, impertinent even. But coming from him, it felt less like an intrusion and more like a genuine attempt to understand the puzzle of her. And she found, to her surprise, that she didn't mind answering. "My father died last year," she began, the story tumbling out of her. "He left behind considerable debts. Our house, my childhood home, was sold to cover them. I was left with few options. My Aunt Hortense offered to take me in, but she made it very clear that I would be expected to serve as her unpaid companion and nurse in her declining years. And that prospect was worse than marrying a stranger in the Montana Territory." Olivia smiled, a sad, rueful expression. "At least the stranger promised adventure and a chance at a life of my own. Aunt Hortense promised only a slow, quiet servitude until her death, followed by a small inheritance that would likely come too late for me to build any life worth having." Wade nodded thoughtfully, absorbing her story. "So you chose the risk over the certainty?" "Yes," she said, "and now I find myself in an entirely different situation than I anticipated, yet oddly not unhappy about it." She glanced at him, her gaze meeting his in the twilight. "Is that strange?" "Not strange," Wade said, his voice soft. "Brave." His eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw a flicker of admiration. "Most people cling to the predictable, even when it's miserable. It takes real courage to embrace the unknown." Something warm and unfamiliar unfurled in Olivia's chest at his words. He didn't see her as a fool or a victim or a charity case. He saw her as brave. For the first time since that jarring crash on the road into Timber Creek, she felt a genuine flicker of hope. A feeling that perhaps this unexpected, disastrous turn of events might lead somewhere worthwhile after all. But as she looked at Wade Dixon, a man who seemed to have a deep and complicated history with the very man who had ruined her, she had a chilling thought. Was his kindness genuine, or was she just another part of the puzzle he was trying to solve? Another piece in the long, sordid story of Samuel Turner? The next 2 weeks fell into a steady, comforting rhythm that was a world away from the stifling parlors of Boston. Olivia rose before the sun to help Wilma prepare a massive breakfast for the boarders: biscuits and gravy, fried eggs, thick slabs of bacon, and endless pots of coffee. Then she spent her mornings cleaning rooms, doing laundry by hand in a large wash tub out back, and tending the vegetable garden. The work was physically demanding, leaving her muscles aching in a way they never had before, but it was also deeply satisfying. For the first time in her life, she felt genuinely useful. 3 afternoons a week, she would walk the half-mile to Wade's livery stable at the edge of town. The livery was a hive of activity, a masculine world of sweat, leather, and horseflesh. Wade not only stabled and cared for the town's horses, but he also ran a small but crucial freight business, transporting goods and mail between Timber Creek and the nearest railroad station, a grueling 40-mile journey. He employed 3 young men to help with the horses and wagons. They were rough-and-tumble boys who regarded Olivia with a wide-eyed, open-mouthed curiosity when she first arrived to set up her workspace in the small, dusty office attached to the stable. "Never seen a lady accountant before," one of them, a lanky teenager named Billy, had remarked on her first day. "Then you're in for an education," Wade had replied before Olivia could even respond, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Miss Edwards knows more about balancing books than the 3 of you know about shoeing a horse, so you'll mind your manners and stay out of her way." The office was small and smelled faintly of hay and old paper, but it had a large window that caught the afternoon light. It was there that Olivia discovered the true extent of Samuel Turner's deceit. Wade's books weren't just a mess. They were a deliberate tangle, a web of confusion that seemed designed to hide something. There were payments recorded with no corresponding invoices, mysterious withdrawals of cash, and freight charges that made no logical sense. And then she found it, a separate, smaller ledger, tucked away at the bottom of a crate of old receipts. This one wasn't in Wade's hurried scrawl. The handwriting was elegant, confident, and chillingly familiar. It was Samuel's. It seemed to be a private record of his investments. But as Olivia's skilled eyes scanned the columns, a sick feeling began to grow in the pit of her stomach. She saw the names of several prominent townspeople, each with a sum of money next to their name. And then she saw another name, Wilma Dixon. Next to it was an amount that made Olivia gasp. It was a huge sum, far more than a widowed boarding-house owner could afford to lose. It was a list of everyone in Timber Creek that Samuel had swindled. And at the very bottom of the list, with the largest sum of all next to it, was a single name: Wade Dixon. The $500 he'd mentioned to Milton Turner was only the beginning. According to this ledger, Samuel owed Wade nearly $2,000. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to ruin a man. The pieces started to click into place with terrifying clarity. Wade's intense, almost predatory interest in Samuel's disappearance, his immediate appearance at the coach, his offer of a job, of a place to stay. It hadn't been simple kindness. He wasn't a white knight. He was a creditor, a man hunting what was owed to him. And Olivia, what was she? A pawn? A piece of leverage? Did he think that by helping her, he was somehow getting closer to Samuel, or to the money Samuel had stolen from him? That afternoon, she confronted him. She waited until the stable boys had left for the day, and the livery was quiet except for the soft snuffling of the horses in their stalls. She placed the small ledger on the desk between them. "I believe this belongs to you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "Or rather, to your former business associate." Wade looked down at the ledger, his expression unreadable. He didn't seem surprised to see it. He slowly opened the cover, his finger tracing Samuel's familiar handwriting. "Where did you find this?" he asked, his voice quiet. "In a box of old receipts." "You've been undercharging the mining company for freight," she said, the words coming out in a rush as she pivoted to the discovery she'd made in his own books. a safer topic. They should be paying at least 15% more based on volume and distance. You're essentially subsidizing their entire operation at your own expense. Wade leaned over her shoulder to examine the figures she had laid out, his face so close to hers that she could feel the warmth of his breath and smell the scent of pine soap on his skin. Her heart hammered in her chest, a confusing mix of fear and something else she refused to name. "You're sure?" he asked, his focus on the numbers. "Positive," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You have a brilliant mind for logistics, Wade, but you're a terrible businessman. You trust people too easily." She looked from the ledgers back to his face. "You trusted Samuel Turner." He straightened up, rubbing his jaw thoughtfully. A muscle twitched in his cheek. "He was charming, persuasive. He came to town with big plans, a new sawmill, a branch of the bank. He got everyone excited. He made promises. And he took their money," Olivia finished for him, her voice cold. "He took your sister's money. He took yours." Wade finally met her gaze, and the weariness in his blue eyes was profound. "Yes," he admitted. "He took nearly everything Wilma had left after her husband died. And he took the money I had been saving to expand this business, to buy the land next door." He let out a long, slow breath. "So, yes, Miss Edwards, when I heard that Samuel Turner's bride was arriving on the afternoon coach, I made it my business to be there. I wasn't sure what to expect. Another conspirator? Or another victim?" "And which did you decide I was?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I knew the moment I saw you on your knees in the dirt," he said, his voice softening, "trying to save a book and a broken locket while your whole world fell apart. I knew you were another victim. And I decided right then and there that Samuel Turner wasn't going to claim another one. Not in my town." The sincerity in his voice was undeniable. The fear in Olivia's chest slowly began to recede, replaced by a wave of relief so powerful it almost made her dizzy. He hadn't been using her. He had been protecting her. And yet, the situation was more complicated than ever. She was living under the roof of a woman her fiancé had ruined, and working for the man he had cheated most of all. She was surrounded by the wreckage of Samuel Turner's life, and somehow she had to build her own future on top of it. With the truth out in the open, a subtle shift occurred in the dynamic between them. The tension of suspicion was gone, replaced by a shared purpose. Olivia wasn't just an employee anymore. She was an ally. Together, in the quiet afternoons in the dusty livery office, they worked to untangle the financial knot Samuel had created. Olivia's sharp mind for numbers and Wade's intimate knowledge of the town's workings made them a formidable team. She discovered that Samuel hadn't just stolen from them. He had cleverly used Wade's freight business as an unwitting cover for some of his schemes, shipping mysterious crates to and from distant cities, using coded language in the billing records. "What do you think was in them?" Olivia asked one afternoon, pointing to a series of unusually expensive freight charges to a post office box in San Francisco. Wade stared at the entry, his brow furrowed. "I don't know. He told me it was specialized mining equipment. Delicate, he said. That's why the shipping cost was so high." "There was no equipment," Olivia said, her finger tracing another line in a different ledger. "These dates correspond with large cash withdrawals from the accounts of his investors. I think he was shipping their money out of the territory, Wade, crate by crate." Wade slammed his fist down on the desk, making the inkwell jump. "That son of a—" He caught himself, glancing at Olivia, and took a deep breath. "He used me. He used my business to help him steal from my friends and my family." "He fooled a lot of people," Olivia said softly. "But not you," Wade said, looking at her with a newfound respect. "He never would have fooled you." As they worked, a quiet intimacy grew between them. Olivia learned the stories behind the names in the ledgers. She learned that Wade's quiet strength was not a sign of coldness, but of a deep, unwavering reliability. When he said he would do something, it was done. When he gave his word, it was kept. She found herself looking forward to her afternoons at the livery, to the comfortable silence as they worked side by side, to the moments when he would look up from his papers and smile at her, a real smile that made his blue eyes crinkle at the corners. He was unlike any man she had ever known in Boston. He was straightforward but never crude, confident without a trace of arrogance. He was a man shaped by the harsh realities of the frontier, and yet he possessed a gentleness she had rarely encountered. One afternoon, as she was deep in concentration, she felt his eyes on her. She looked up to find him staring, a pensive look on his face. She blushed. "What is it?" "I was just thinking," he said slowly, setting down his pen, "about how different everything is here compared to Boston." "Different is one word for it," she said with a small laugh. "In Boston," she explained, "everything is about appearances and social standing, who your father was, how much money you have. Here it seems to be about what a person can do, their usefulness." "And which do you prefer?" Wade asked, his gaze intense. Olivia considered the question seriously. "I think I prefer being valued for my abilities rather than my family name or how well I pour tea at a social gathering." Wade nodded. "That's why the West suits some people better than others. It's a fresh start, a chance to be judged on your own merits." He paused. "Though I imagine there are still things you miss." "Libraries," Olivia said immediately, a wistful note in her voice. "Concert halls, bookshops, sidewalks that aren't made of mud." Wade laughed, a warm, rich sound that filled the small office. "Fair complaints. But Timber Creek does have a small library of a sort. It's part of the school building. And Mrs. Frederick, one of Wilma's boarders, has a piano in her room. She teaches music to the local children." "Really?" Olivia's face brightened. This was the first she'd heard of it. "I used to play quite well. I miss it terribly." "I'm sure she'd let you practice sometimes if you asked," Wade said. His gaze lingered on her face, and his voice grew softer. "You know, when you smile like that, it's like watching the sun come out from behind the clouds." The compliment, delivered so simply and so matter-of-factly, caught Olivia completely off guard. It sent a pleasant warmth spreading through her chest, but the warmth was immediately followed by a chill of propriety. "Mr. Dixon," she began, her voice flustered. "Wade," he corrected her, as he always did. "Wade," she amended, her voice barely a whisper. I'm still technically engaged to Samuel Turner." His expression sobered instantly. The smile vanished. "You're right," he said, his voice clipped. "That was improper of me." He turned back to his paperwork, a slight furrow between his brows, a wall suddenly erected between them. Olivia wanted to tell him that she hadn't minded. She wanted to tell him that his words had made her feel more beautiful than any fancy compliment she'd ever received in Boston. She wanted to tell him that the thought of being engaged to Samuel Turner now felt like a lead weight in her stomach. But the unwritten rules of society, ingrained in her since birth, held her tongue. Instead, she returned to the ledgers, but her concentration was shattered. The easy companionship of the afternoon was gone, replaced by a thick, awkward silence. A line had been drawn between them, and she didn't know how to cross it. That evening at dinner, Wilma made an announcement that sent a ripple of excitement through the boarding house. "The town's holding a harvest dance next Saturday," she said, her eyes sparkling. "At the new community hall. It's the first proper social event since they finished building it last month." The elderly sisters, Mrs. Carr and Mrs. Sloane, clapped their hands with delight. The mining company clerk immediately, and rather clumsily, asked Mrs. Frederick, the piano teacher, if she would accompany him. The other school teacher, the timid Miss Holloway, sighed wistfully. "I don't suppose I'll attend. I have no one to escort me, and it wouldn't be proper to go alone. Nonsense, Wilma declared. We'll all go together. There's safety in numbers. Her gaze landed on Olivia. Olivia, you'll come too, won't you? All eyes at the table turned to her. Olivia hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. I'm not sure it would be appropriate, she said softly, given my situation with Mr. Turner. Fiddlesticks, said Mrs. Carr, the elder and more outspoken of the two sisters. That man left you high and dry, dearie. No one in this town would fault you for attending a community dance. Besides, added Wilma, a knowing and mischievous smile playing on her lips, I happen to know my brother plans to attend, and he's an excellent dancer. Olivia felt her cheeks grow warm. I couldn't possibly— You could, and you should, Wilma interrupted firmly. Her tone was final. You've done nothing but work like a dog since you arrived. A night of music and dancing will do you a world of good. It's settled. Later that evening, as Olivia was helping Wilma clear the dinner table, her friend cornered her in the kitchen. You like him, don't you? Wilma asked, her question as direct and sharp as a needle. My brother. Startled, Olivia nearly dropped the stack of plates she was carrying. I respect him greatly, she stammered. He's been very kind to me. Wilma snorted, taking the plates from Olivia's trembling hands and setting them in the wash basin. That wasn't what I asked, and you know it. Her expression softened, and she placed a hand on Olivia's arm. Look, I've known Wade my whole life. He's a good man, the best I know, and I haven't seen him look at a woman the way he looks at you since, well, ever, to be honest. But Samuel, Olivia started. Samuel Turner is a scoundrel who abandoned you without a second thought after stealing my life savings, Wilma said, her voice laced with a bitterness she rarely showed. You owe him nothing. Less than nothing. She turned back to the sink, her movements brisk. At least come to the dance. Wear your best dress. See what happens. Life is too short, Olivia. Too short to waste on men who don't deserve you, or on promises that were never real to begin with. The night of the dance arrived with a crispness in the air that hinted at the coming autumn. Olivia stood before the small, warped mirror in her room, assessing her appearance with critical eyes. She wore her best dress, a deep blue silk with modest lace trim at the collar and cuffs. It was the dress she had originally brought to be her wedding dress. The irony was almost too painful to bear, but it was the only suitable garment she owned for such an occasion. Wilma had helped her arrange her hair, pinning the long chestnut waves into an elegant updo, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. You look beautiful, Wilma had assured her, giving her shoulders a squeeze. Wade won't know what hit him. Wilma, please, Olivia had protested, her cheeks flushing. I'm not trying to— That is, I don't expect— Oh, hush, Wilma had laughed. Just enjoy yourself tonight. That's all anyone expects. The new community hall was buzzing with activity, transformed for the occasion with colorful paper lanterns and decorations of autumn foliage. A small stage at one end held Mrs. Frederick at the piano, accompanied by two local men, one on the fiddle and the other on the guitar. Their lively music filled the room, along with the sound of laughter and stomping feet. It seemed as though nearly everyone in Timber Creek had turned out, from ranchers in their Sunday best to miners who, despite their best efforts, still bore faint traces of dust on their clothes. When Olivia entered with Wilma and the other ladies from the boarding house, she immediately felt 100 pairs of eyes turn their way. A low murmur went through the crowd. She didn't need to hear the words to know what they were saying. There she was, the abandoned bride, Samuel Turner's girl. Don't you mind them, Wilma whispered, giving her arm a reassuring squeeze. Small towns run on gossip. By next week, they'll have found something new to talk about. Across the crowded room, Olivia spotted Wade. He was in conversation with a group of other ranchers, but he looked different tonight. He wore a clean white shirt, a dark vest, and trousers that had been pressed. He'd even made an effort to tame his usually unruly sandy hair. As if he could feel her gaze on him, he looked up. His conversation faltered. Their eyes met across the dance floor. For a moment, the entire room seemed to fade away. There was only the music and the look in his eyes. Olivia felt rooted to the spot as Wade excused himself from his friends and began to make his way toward her, weaving through the laughing, dancing crowd with a singular purpose. When he reached her, he removed his hat and offered a slight, formal bow. "Miss Edwards," he said, his voice a low rumble that was almost lost in the noise of the room. "You look—" He paused as if searching for the right word. "Like a vision." "Thank you," she replied softly, her heart beginning to beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You clean up rather nicely yourself, Mr. Dixon." A small smile played on his lips at her use of his formal name. "I was hoping I might claim a dance," he said, "if you're not otherwise engaged. I would like that very much." The musicians struck up a waltz. Wade took her hand, his touch sending a jolt of electricity up her arm, and led her onto the dance floor. His other hand rested gently but firmly at her waist. He was a confident and natural dancer, guiding her through the steps with an easy grace that surprised her. "Where did a livery owner learn to waltz so well?" she asked, genuinely curious. "My mother," he said, smiling down at her. "She insisted all her children learn proper dancing, said it was the mark of a gentleman, no matter what kind of work he did for a living." "She sounds like a wise woman." She was. They completed several circuits of the floor in comfortable silence, moving together as if they had been dancing with each other for years. The awkwardness from the livery office seemed to have melted away in the warm, festive atmosphere of the hall. Then Wade's expression grew serious. "There's something I need to tell you, Olivia." Something in his tone made her heart quicken with a sense of dread. "What is it?" He didn't answer right away. He just held her a little tighter as he guided her through a turn. His jaw was set, and his eyes were dark with a serious light. "I received a telegram this afternoon," he said, his voice so low she had to strain to hear him. "From the territorial marshal in the Black Hills." The music suddenly seemed to fade into the background. It was just the two of them, turning slowly in the center of a silent world. "It's about Samuel." Olivia missed a step, but Wade's firm grip kept her upright, pulling her back into the rhythm of the dance. "What about him?" she whispered. Wade looked down at her, his blue eyes filled with a complicated mix of emotions she couldn't begin to decipher. "He's dead, Olivia. Samuel Turner was killed in a claim dispute 2 weeks ago. Dead." The word was a stone dropping into a deep, silent well. Olivia absorbed the information, searching her own feelings for the appropriate response. There was shock, certainly, a detached sadness for a life cut so violently short. But there was no grief. There was no devastation a woman was supposed to feel upon learning of her betrothed's death. There was only a profound and somewhat guilty sense of release. I barely knew him," she said finally, the words a quiet confession. "It seems wrong to pretend a depth of feeling I don't possess." Wade nodded, his eyes full of understanding. "Still," he said, his voice gentle, "it changes your situation. You're no longer bound by any promise to him. You're free." The music came to an end, and the couples around them applauded the musicians. Wade led Olivia off the dance floor, his hand still lightly at the small of her back, guiding her toward the refreshment table where a large bowl of punch sat. "Would you care for some punch?" he asked, reaching for a cup. "Yes, thank you." Olivia accepted the drink, her hand trembling slightly. She used the moment to gather her thoughts. Samuel was dead. The man who had brought her here, the man who had abandoned her, The man who had cheated this entire town was gone forever. The final thread connecting her to her disastrous past had been severed. "Wade," she said, setting down her cup, summoning every ounce of her courage, "about Samuel's death." "You don't need to say anything," he said quickly. "I understand it's complicated." "No, that's just it," she insisted, turning to face him. She had to say this. She had to be honest, with him and with herself. "It's not complicated. I feel sad that his life ended so violently, but I don't feel like a widow. I never truly felt like his bride-to-be either. Our arrangement was more of a business transaction than a romance." Wade studied her face, his expression carefully neutral. "And now?" "And now," she continued, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must be able to hear it. "Now I find myself in a place I never expected to be, doing work I never imagined myself doing." She hesitated, then pressed on, the words tumbling out before she could lose her nerve. "And developing feelings I never anticipated having." Wade's expression remained unreadable, and for one terrifying moment Olivia feared she had made a terrible mistake, that she had grievously misread the situation and exposed her heart for nothing. "Feelings?" he prompted, his voice quiet. She took a deep breath. "Feelings for a certain livery owner who carried me through town when I arrived with only one shoe," she said, a small, shaky smile touching her lips. "Who has shown me nothing but kindness and respect from the moment we met. Who has made me feel more at home in a few short weeks than I ever felt in my entire life in Boston." For a long moment, Wade said nothing. He just looked at her, his blue eyes searching hers. Then, slowly, his hand found hers, his strong fingers intertwining with hers with a gentle but firm pressure. "Olivia," he said, and the way he spoke her name was like a prayer on his lips. "I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment I saw you on your knees in the dirt, trying to gather your scattered belongings. I just never thought I had the right to say so." Relief and a joy so pure, it was almost painful, bubbled up inside her like a spring. "And now?" she whispered, echoing his earlier question. "And now," he said, his thumb gently stroking the back of her hand, "now I'm asking if you'll allow me to court you properly. No rushed arrangements, no mail-order agreements. Just a man and a woman getting to know each other with honest intentions." "I would like that very much, Wade Dixon," she whispered. The musicians began to play another waltz. Wade smiled, a slow, wonderful smile that transformed his entire face. He led her back to the dance floor, and this time he held her just a fraction closer than propriety strictly allowed. As they moved together in perfect synchrony, surrounded by the light and music and the curious eyes of the entire town, Olivia felt the last pieces of her old life and her old expectations fall away. They were replaced by something new, something real, and something infinitely more precious. A future shaped not by necessity, but by choice, by love. But as she rested her head against his shoulder, a small, nagging thought surfaced. A claim dispute. It was a common enough way to die in the gold fields, but something about it felt too simple, too neat. Samuel Turner had made a lot of enemies, and she had a terrible feeling that there was more to the story of his death than Wade was telling her. The months that followed were filled with a quiet, blossoming happiness that Olivia had never known before. The town of Timber Creek, which had once seemed so hostile and forbidding, slowly began to feel like home. The whispers that had followed her down the street died away, replaced by friendly nods and greetings. She was no longer Samuel Turner's poor abandoned bride. She was Olivia Edwards, the sharp-witted woman who helped Wilma run the best boarding house in the territory, and the indispensable accountant who had transformed Wade Dixon's livery into a thriving, organized business. Her courtship with Wade progressed with a natural, unhurried ease that felt as comfortable as slipping into a well-worn pair of boots. There were picnics by the creek on sunny autumn afternoons, with blankets spread out on the grass and baskets filled with Wilma's fried chicken. There were long Sunday rides in Wade's best buggy, exploring the winding roads that led up into the pine-covered hills surrounding the valley. There were quiet evenings spent on the boarding house porch, talking for hours until Wilma would pointedly come out to trim the lanterns, a clear signal that it was time for Wade to go home. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about her life in Boston, about her love for books and music, about her quiet, scholarly father. He told her about growing up in the Montana Territory, about his dream of not just running the livery, but expanding it, building carriages, creating something that would last. With every passing day, Olivia's feelings for him deepened. She loved his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, his gentle teasing sense of humor. She loved the way his eyes would find hers across a crowded room, and the way his hand always seemed to find hers when they walked down the street. Wade, for his part, was completely smitten. He had never met a woman like Olivia. She was as delicate and refined as the Eastern ladies he'd read about in books, but she possessed a core of steel he had not expected. She wasn't afraid of hard work, and her mind was sharper than anyone he knew. She had taken the chaotic mess of his business and transformed it into a profitable, well-oiled machine. But more than that, she had taken the quiet, lonely corners of his life and filled them with light and laughter. By the time the first snows of winter arrived, blanketing the mountains in a thick layer of white and turning the streets of Timber Creek into frozen, rutted paths, Wade and Olivia had become an inseparable, accepted part of the town's fabric. On Christmas Eve, after the lively celebration at the boarding house had wound down and the other residents had retired to their rooms, Wade asked Olivia to bundle up for a short walk. The night was perfectly clear and breathtakingly cold. The stars blazed above them like scattered diamonds on black velvet, and the moon cast a silvery glow over the snow-covered town. Their breath formed little white clouds in the frosty air. "Where are we going?" Olivia asked, her gloved hand tucked securely in the crook of his arm. "It's a surprise," Wade said, his voice full of a happy mystery. He led her not toward his sister's house, but through the silent town, toward the livery stable. "The livery?" she asked, confused. "Trust me," was all he said. Inside, lanterns had been lit, casting a warm golden glow over the central area of the stable. The usual clutter of wagons, harnesses, and tools had been cleared away. In the very center of the space, a small table had been set for two, with a checkered tablecloth, two chairs, a bottle of wine, and a single, small, wrapped package. The horses watched them from their stalls with mild, curious eyes. "Wade, what is all this?" Olivia whispered, overwhelmed. He guided her to the center of the space, his hand gentle on her back. "I wanted somewhere private for this moment," he said, his voice soft. "And this place seemed fitting." He pulled out a chair for her. "This is where we truly began to know each other, where I watched you transform chaos into order with that clever mind and those beautiful hands. This is where I fell more and more deeply in love with you each and every day." Olivia sat down, her heart fluttering like a captured bird. "It does have a certain charm," she said, looking around at their makeshift dining room, "though I suspect the horses might disagree with our choice of venue." Wade laughed, taking the seat opposite her. "I've already bribed them with extra oats," he said. "They've promised to be discreet." He grew serious then, his gaze locking with hers across the small table. He pushed the wrapped package toward her. "Open it." Olivia's fingers, suddenly clumsy, carefully untied the simple ribbon and removed the brown paper wrapping. Inside was a small, intricately carved wooden box. Wild roses, her favorite flower, had been carved into the lid. She lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded blue velvet, lay a delicate gold ring set with a single small but perfect diamond that sparkled in the lantern light. "It was my grandmother's," Wade said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "My grandfather gave it to her when they first homesteaded here, before there even was a Timber Creek. He told her it would anchor her, a promise of beauty and strength, through whatever storms came their way." Tears blurred Olivia's vision. She looked up from the ring to find that Wade had moved from his chair and was now kneeling on one knee beside her in the clean-swept hay. He took her free hand in both of his. "Olivia Edwards," he began, his voice husky, "when you arrived in Timber Creek with only one shoe and a broken trunk, I had no idea that my entire life was about to change forever. I thought I was simply helping a stranded traveler, but instead I found the other half of my soul. You are the smartest, bravest, kindest woman I have ever known." He paused, taking a shaky breath. "Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Will you build a life with me right here in Timber Creek?" "Yes," Olivia whispered, the tears finally spilling over and tracing paths down her cold cheeks. Joy, pure and overwhelming, swelled in her chest. "Yes, Wade, with all my heart, yes." Wade's face broke into a radiant smile. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. He then rose to his feet, pulling her up and into his arms. Their kiss was tender at first, a gentle sealing of a promise, then deepened with all the pent-up love and longing of the past few months. It was a kiss full of the promise of a future together. A future neither of them could ever have imagined 6 months earlier, when fate and a missing shoe had first brought them together. As he held her close, the warmth of his embrace chasing away the winter chill, Olivia knew she was finally, truly home. But a tiny cold part of her brain, the part that was good with numbers and solving puzzles, couldn't help but notice one small detail. The carved wild roses on the box were identical to a little doodle Samuel Turner had drawn at the bottom of every single one of his letters to her. Their wedding took place on the first day of spring, when the snow had finally melted from the hillsides, revealing a carpet of new green grass dotted with wildflowers. The entire town turned out for the celebration, which was held in the same community hall where they had first danced together. Wilma, beaming with a pride and satisfaction that made it clear she was taking full credit for the match, stood as Olivia's witness. As Olivia stood beside Wade, speaking her vows in a clear, steady voice, she wore a simple but elegant dress she had sewn herself, and a brand new pair of satin shoes dyed to match. But tucked away safely in her trunk was the single worn shoe she'd been wearing when she first arrived in Timber Creek. She was keeping it as a reminder of how sometimes losing your way can lead you exactly where you are meant to be. The first few years of their marriage were a whirlwind of hard work and happiness. Their partnership was as successful in business as it was in life. Wade's practical skills and knowledge of freight, combined with Olivia's sharp business acumen, allowed them to expand the livery at a rapid pace. They bought the adjacent plot of land Wade had always wanted. They built a new, larger stable and a carriage manufacturing shop. The Dixon Livery and Carriage Works became one of the most successful enterprises in the now booming town. They built a comfortable two-story house on their new land, with a wide porch for watching sunsets and a large garden where Olivia planted vegetables and, of course, wild roses. 2 years after their wedding, their son William was born. A happy, boisterous boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's curious mind. Olivia had found a life more fulfilling than any she could have ever dreamed of. She was a wife, a mother, a respected businesswoman. The lonely, desperate woman who had stepped off that stagecoach felt like a ghost from another lifetime. But sometimes, in the dead of night, she would think about that carved rose box. It was a small, insignificant detail, a coincidence, surely. But it nagged at her. Samuel had used that symbol. And the box Wade had given her, the box he claimed had been his grandmother's, bore the very same design. It was a loose thread in the otherwise perfect tapestry of her new life, and her logical mind couldn't help but pull at it. Then, 5 years after her arrival in Timber Creek, a man rode into town. He was a stranger, older, with a weathered face and weary eyes. He was a territorial marshal from the Dakotas, he said, just passing through. He stabled his horse at their livery. That evening, as Wade was showing the marshal his stock, Olivia brought a tray of coffee and cookies out to the stable office. The two men were talking, and she overheard a name that made her freeze in the doorway. Samuel Turner. Always wondered what happened in the end, the marshal was saying. We knew Turner had been running his cons all over the territory. He swindled a lot of folks. The man who finally killed him in that claim dispute, a card sharp named Miller, we caught him a year later. Before we hanged him, he confessed to everything. Said he'd been tracking Turner for months after Turner cheated him out of a small fortune. A claim dispute, Wade said, his voice carefully neutral. That's what the report said. Well, that was the story they cooked up, the marshal said with a cynical laugh. Truth is, there was no dispute. Miller found Turner at his camp, unarmed. Shot him in the back. But Turner had cheated so many men in that camp, nobody was willing to testify against Miller. They were glad to be rid of him. They all swore up and down it was a fair fight over a worthless piece of rock. The marshal took a sip of coffee. Funny thing, though. Miller swore that when he found Turner's camp, someone else had just been there. Said he saw fresh hoofprints riding away. Said it looked like whoever it was had gone through Turner's belongings, but hadn't taken the money pouch. Just looking for something, Miller reckoned. Olivia's blood ran cold. She backed away from the door, her heart pounding. Later that night, when the marshal was gone and the house was quiet, she confronted Wade. They stood in their comfortable parlor, the evidence of their shared life all around them. You went after him, didn't you? She asked, her voice quiet but shaking with the intensity of her emotions. You went to the Black Hills. You found him. Wade looked at her for a long moment, his face etched with a pain she had never seen before. He didn't try to deny it. He just nodded slowly. Yes, he admitted, his voice rough. I had to. For Wilma, for my family, for all the people he'd hurt. I had to get back what he stole. I tracked him for a week. The marshal said someone was at his camp just before he was killed, Olivia pressed, her voice trembling. He said they went through his things. When I got there, Wade said, his eyes pleading with her to understand, he was already dead. Miller, or whoever it was, had already come and gone. I saw the body and I left. I reported it anonymously to the nearest marshal's office and rode home. He was lying. She could see it in his eyes. He was a terrible liar. It was one of the things she loved about him. You're not telling me the whole truth, she whispered. Wade let out a long, shuddering breath and sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. I found him alive, he confessed, his voice muffled. He was alone. I confronted him. I told him I wanted my family's money back. He just laughed at me, Olivia. He laughed and said we were all fools who deserved to be fleeced. Wade looked up, his face pale. He pulled a knife. We fought. It went off. The knife. It went into his chest. It was an accident. I never meant to. I just wanted our money back. The room was silent. Olivia stared at him, the man she loved, the father of her child. A killer. And the box? She whispered, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. The ring box. Wade looked confused. What about it? The wild roses. It was Samuel's. I saw it in his things when I was gathering them from the street that first day. It must have fallen out of his pocket. You picked it up. It was his, wasn't it? Not your grandmother's. Wade's face crumbled. The final lie. A small, sentimental one was the one that broke him. Yes, he whispered, his voice full of shame. He had it in his tent. It was empty, but it was so beautifully carved. I took it. I wanted to give you something beautiful, something with a story. Our story felt so tangled up with his ugliness. I wanted to create a better story for us, a clean one. Olivia looked at the man she had married. He had lied to her. He had killed a man, albeit a man who deserved it. He had built the foundation of their beautiful life on a dark and violent secret. She should have been horrified. She should have been afraid. But as she looked at his anguished face, she felt an overwhelming wave of love and compassion. He hadn't done it for greed or for revenge. He had done it for his family, for justice, to protect the people he loved from a predator. He had done it for her, to give her a life free from the shadow of Samuel Turner. She crossed the room and knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "Our story isn't ugly, Wade," she said softly, her voice firm. "It's real, and it's ours." He looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears. "Can you forgive me?" "There is nothing to forgive," she said. She leaned forward and kissed him, a kiss of acceptance, of partnership, of a love that was strong enough to withstand even the darkest truths. From the porch of their home, Wade and Olivia Dixon watched their son, William, now 8 years old, teach his 5-year-old sister, Elizabeth, how to properly chase butterflies in the garden. The laughter of their children carried on the warm summer breeze. The Dixon Livery and Carriage Works was the largest business in town, a testament to their hard work and their partnership. Timber Creek was no longer a dusty, desperate outpost. It was a thriving town, a hub of commerce for the whole valley, and they had helped build it. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life," Olivia said, leaning her head against her husband's solid shoulder. "If that stagecoach wheel hadn't hit that rut," Wade mused, his arm tightening around her waist. "If your trunk hadn't fallen. If you hadn't lost your shoe. If you hadn't been waiting for the man who cheated you," Olivia added softly. "So many terrible things, so many lies, all leading us right here." Wade pressed a kiss to her temple. "I don't believe it was terrible things, Liv," he murmured against her hair. "I believe it was destiny, just wearing a very convincing disguise." Olivia smiled, watching their son gently show his sister a ladybug crawling on a rose petal. A destiny that began with a missing shoe, a broken trunk, and a secret that bound them together forever. "And I'd do it all again," Wade whispered, his voice for her ears only. "I'd do it all again for you. If you believe that sometimes the greatest love stories are built on the messiest foundations and that everyone deserves a second chance at happiness, don't forget to like this video and hit that subscribe button for more stories you won't be able to stop thinking about.